Good afternoon. We are at the end of our Digital Scale-Up Summit in Israel. We started our digital journey to Israel almost 1 month ago. And last week, we have the most important activities that substantially are the one-to-one matching between a group of approximately a dozen of international corporates with top-notch Israeli scale-ups. So this has been the core of the activities. To prepping up this digital journey, we have the pleasure to interview some top-notch Israeli leaders like Zev Holtzman, like Nathalie Refoua, and today we are closing our digital journey to Israel with Mr. Aharon Aharon. Aharon is the CEO of the Israeli Innovation Authority, formerly known as the Chief Scientific Office of the Minister of Economy. And so I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to have this conversation today with Aharon, to go through not only in the Israeli Innovation Authority model, that has been one of the pillars that contributed to the success of the Israeli innovation ecosystem, but also to have the opportunity to tap into experience and knowledge of Aharon, of the Israeli ecosystem, to get a better grasp on why Israel is so special and so unique. So welcome, Aharon.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Well, welcome and have a nice one. Thank you.
So Aharon, thank you for being with us today. And so before start the digging into Israel and the specific role of the Israeli Innovation Authority, I would like to briefly go through your background. Again, I know that you've been at Apple in Israel as general manager. You have a startup experience, a multiple experience. So can you briefly dive into your background also, that we can get a better grasp in terms of where you come from?
Sure. So I started my professional career at IBM Research. I spent 14 years in IBM Research. Most of it was in Israel. Part of it was in the States. And later on, I joined a company, a Nasdaq-traded company in the Silicon Valley named Zoran. I was the chief operating officer of that company. Then I was a CEO of a Siemens company that was located in Israel. I had 2 startups, as you mentioned. I was a little bit time in the VC industry. I joined Apple in Cupertino, first of all, and then I moved back to Israel in order to open the R&D facility of Apple in Israel. And 3 years ago, I joined the public sector, in which the position that I'm currently in. So that's a little bit of the background that I have.
Again, I think your background is quite unique, and then you have been a strong experience working with multinational corporations, helping some of them on setting up in Israel, and so probably there's been the bridge to your current role. That is one of the main activities that Israeli Innovation Authority is doing, is also to being a sort of a bridge for multinational corporate to set up presence, R&D facilities, and not only R&D in Israel. So again, if we should summarize in a few sentences, what is the role of multinational corporates for Israel? What would you say?
So first of all, let me take my own experience. There are 2 experiences that I had with multinationals. The first one with IBM Research. So when IBM Research wanted to open something outside of the US, Israel was the number 1 choice. So they opened in 1972, as early as 1972. And later on, it was, first of all, in Yorktown, after that in the Silicon Valley, in Almaden, and after that they opened in Israel. If I'm getting back to Apple experience, when Apple wanted to go outside of Israel in order to do some R&D, they picked, outside of the US, they picked Israel. It was in 2011. And I believe that the major reason for doing so was the talents. So, the thought about what will be the talents that will be required in order to promote the R&D. There is the culture, difference between the US and Israel. And of course, there is the time difference between the Silicon Valley and Israel, 10 hours. And the day difference between Monday to Friday to where it's Sunday to Thursday. But despite of all, they decided to open it in Israel. So I believe today they have, if I'm not mistaken, more than 1,500 employees in Israel in 2 sites. So it's quite flourishing, taking into account that it was only opened in 2012.
Less than 10 years ago, yes.
Yes. So I believe that the main reason for companies to join Israel, and we have about 400 R&D companies or multinational companies in Israel that are very active. And 50% of the Israeli R&D is being conducted by those multinationals. So they're playing a very major role in the ecosystem here. I believe that the incentive of a multinational to get to Israel is twofold. First of all, to have the talents. It's very good talents overall. But the other thing that I believe it's a little bit different than other places, there is a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, such that, if you see 2 students that are sitting on an espresso in the academia, probably they're going to talk about how to open the next startups. So it's, we have 7,000 startups, and normally every year they're opening something like 800 startups, closing about half of them. But it's still growing up. And, if you ask a mother in Israel, what will you want your son to be or your daughter to be, they will tell high-tech, which is a very unnormal answer, Yeah. So this is something that is part of the culture. And when people are looking for innovation, I believe that they're looking for the entrepreneurial spirit, they're looking for those things that are making the difference. Because if you see the academy, the industry, etc., it's quite similar to other places. So I believe that the secret sauce is the innovation and the very hunger to do startups.
Yeah, probably if you ask the same mother in Europe what they want for their son or daughters, probably they found a job in a bank. That probably tell you the difference, yes. But again, we published last week our annual research on the global corporate presence in Israel regarding innovation. And we do a similar research for Silicon Valley. And again, Silicon Valley and Israel, despite the difference in size of the ecosystem, or Silicon Valley is larger, they have a lot of commonalities, and one of the commonalities is the ability to attract global corporations. Silicon Valley is a bit ahead, but still Israel is not that far behind. And the main difference between Israel and Silicon Valley is the form and the way the corporates do operate in Silicon Valley versus in Israel. While in Silicon Valley, they have a more lean presence, mostly antennas, innovation lab, CVC offices. In Israel, I think that the most typical way of being there is an R&D center. And definitely, if you look at the number of people, again, we measure only the people working strictly on innovation, not manufacturing, not sales. The number of people that we track for Israel is 45,000. 40,000, 45,000, while in Silicon Valley, we are talking about 20, 25,000. So it's almost times 2. That means that probably Israel is still perceived as the way when you do very innovative edge technology and doing a lot of research, while Silicon Valley probably is still a more transactional approach. Going there for investments, for M&A, but not yet for R&D. So yeah. How do you see these numbers?
Yeah. It is changing along the time. So if you had this review about 10 years ago, it would have been changed. It would have been more dramatic towards R&D in Israel. So we are going still from the startup nation to the scale-up nation, in the sense that we see a lot of unicorns in Israel, which is a new phenomenon. we see those companies, more than 30 at the end of 2019, were unicorns in Israel, startups that are still private, but evaluate more than $1 billion US. We see a lot of companies that we call them complete companies in the sense that there has a core R&D, but still they have, marketing, technical support, sales, etc. But if you see why it is an R&D country or an R&D hub, I believe it goes back to the origin of the country, because the country at that time, and of course we don't have a local market. The local market here is very, very small. So as a result, to have a very flourishing commercial makes sense only if the world is really global, like the coronavirus showed us. Okay, so if the world is global, yes, you can have the sales people that are far from the market. But if it is not global, really, you need to have the sales and the commercial where the market is, and the market is not in Israel. So that's when we started. I believe that the first companies that joined Israel was Intel, IBM, Motorola, National Semiconductor, etc. It was back in 1972, 71 to 74. And those companies were interested only in R&D. So it was not at all commercial. So it opened really an R&D lab. Later on, when we started to have commercial value, it started by introducing the VCs community into Israel. It started to change a little bit, but still the major goal of those companies that joined Israel was the R&D capabilities. The commercial capabilities were normally at the headquarters, and the headquarters are normally where the market is. So if you analyze, for example, the European market as well as the American market and the Chinese market, you will see that most companies that have the business started from the local business and then ended up being a global company. So also in Europe, you see this phenomena, you see it in the States, and you see it in China. So they started from having local market, and after that growing to be global. Unfortunately, in Israel, the local market doesn't exist.
Yeah. Okay, going back to the potential strengths, why Israel is so special. Again, we already discussed one is the mentality, the strong entrepreneurial push. The other end is probably, I would say, the level of education. Some of them point also to the role of the military and the defense. What are the factors that really makes Israel so different, so unique, despite that it's being a tiny country that is always by nature has to look outside of itself? Because
First of all, I believe that the mother of all innovation is need. Whenever you don't have something in the country that can fulfill for the human resources, we don't have natural resources. We have really, now recently they found some natural gas, but if you go back to Israel in 1948 and later on, we didn't have anything besides human resources. So first of all, there was a huge need for something. And so that's the first. The second one is it was a desert. So for example, if you see the agriculture in Israel is very well developed, not because it's the best place to have agriculture, but because of need. There was a need to have a very sophisticated irrigation systems, for example. The second one, which is quite unique, is what used to be called the Office of Chief Scientist. It was opened in 1971. So it was a very clear vision of the government at that time that they need to promote, R&D in the private sector, which is very unique, to take the public money and to pour it into the private sector. So basically the idea was we don't have anything else besides science and technology. So as a result, the government is promoting science and technology. And the idea was similar to what we are doing today. Let's promote companies and encourage them to take risk. So that was the idea, and the idea still exists. So for example, if we are going about the way that we are promoting, encouraging companies to take risk, we are proposing them to have a very sophisticated project. Of course, they are applying to us with this project. And then if this project is, with high risk and with wonderful potential, economical potential, then we support it. We might give as 50% of the R&D cost of that project. Now, if the company is successful, then they need to get back to us with royalties up to the level of grant or up to the level of loan that we provided. But if the company is not successful or the project is not successful, then we forget about it. So it turned to be a grant. So it's a very useful way to encourage company to take risk. So this was the first stage. I believe that the government of Israel at that time was quite pioneering in the public-private partnership. The second stage was how to promote VCs, how to promote the money to come to Israel. That was the second stage. It was called Yozma. And it was, again, a very sophisticated...
It was at the beginning of the 90s, right, if I'm not wrong?
Yes, it was a very sophisticated way to get the VCs in Israel. So at that time, the government invested $100 million for 10 VCs. At that time, it was a good amount of money. Today, it looks funny.
Yeah.
And then 10 new VCs that came from abroad joined Israel. And till today, the VC community, of course, they are working without any government support, but the VC community is based on this method of the government to participate in the risk with the local VCs. So today, I believe that what makes the difference is, as I said before, we have government support, which normally comes through us. We have a very nice academy. We have the IDF, or the Israeli Defense Forces, are playing also a major role in the sense that a lot of problems, technical problems, are migrating from the army into the public. For example, cyber is one of them, but it's not the only one. For example, very sophisticated vision algorithms is coming from the army, and they're going to the private sector, of course. And the other one is that there is a lot of engineers in the army that are being trained by the army. So as a result, when they are finishing the army after 4 years or 5 years or 6 years, they are joining the private sector and they are flourishing. A lot of companies started in Israel by those that graduated out of the army. Now, to say a word, normally when we are talking about the army, we're talking about the technical army. We are talking about the intelligence units, etc. We are not talking about the real army. So no, but also the real army helps in the sense of maturity. But we're talking mainly on the intelligence units that have very sophisticated problems to deal with. We are the most attacked country in the world, for example, and they have to come up with solutions because otherwise, it's going to be a failure. So I believe that this is another strength, and what I said before is that the combination of the MNCs that are very active in Israel and the startups that are very active in Israel. Now, if you see what is the contribution of the MNCs, it's a lot of contribution to Israel because, first of all, it's very, the top technology is being developed in the sites in Israel. Really the top technology. I can say it by Apple because I'm familiar with it. I can say it by IBM. But I can say with other companies, is they're taking very sophisticated projects out of the headquarters and developing them in Israel. The second one is how to manage, it's a well-established management styles, well-established disciplines in engineering, etc. So those people that are going to be trained in those companies, MNCs, are coming with very well-trained engineering disciplines and management disciplines. And of course, when they are moving away and going to startups, etc., they are taking those methods and impose them on the startups, which is a very good way for the startups to have a combination of entrepreneurship and good management style. So I believe that this is, and of course, there's the spillover effect. The spillover effect is not something that is intended, but at the end of the day, when companies are developing something and people are looking for other domains, they are looking for domains that they are qualified in. And for example, one of the one of the nice ideas, for example, about it, when Better Place was founded and invested about $1 billion of VC money in order to get to a failure at the end. So they were very pioneering in having electrical car. So what happened is at that time, the government put a call for other companies to join Israel in order to have work on the autonomous cars. And GM won the tender. And a lot of people that were in Better Place joined GM. And today GM have a very flourishing R&D center in Israel around the autonomous car. So this is a kind of a spillover. Because of the failure of the first company, the second company benefited from it, and of course the Israeli market. Today, I believe that we have around 500 or 600 companies that are around the autonomous car in different disciplines, of course. And I believe it should be attributed to that pioneering people that started with the autonomous car very early at that time. So, for example, Mobileye is one of them and started around the same time. So it's a very flourishing community, but started with a combination of government initiative to subsidize those companies and with an IP that was created by a private sector.
Going back to the role of the government that opened the doors to explain again what the Israeli Innovation Authority is doing, what is its role, in bridging Israel to the rest of the world, specifically multinational corporates. Can you give some better understanding in terms of what is the role of the Innovation Authority and what are the plans, what are the KPIs?
Yes. So first of all, the idea is how to make the Israeli market, R&D market, accessible to the MNC. So that is the first role, and it's mainly applicable for those companies that do not have local presence in Israel. So for those companies, we are providing, for example, very unique and effective scouting services. We don't have only the normal scouting services that anyone can provide, but we have very dedicated databases that we can scan and can make the matchmaking between startup companies, for example, and the MNC. Now, we enable those MNCs, for example, to join consortia in Israel that is called Magnet, and to join as an observer and to benefit from what the consortia is doing. So this is something, again, that we enable the MNCs to look at IP that is being developed by the consortia and to have an impact, for example, as an end user or as someone that already developed a few of the IPs that are needed for the consortium. We enable companies, MNCs, to join Israel in a very delicate form, not to just open the sites as IBM did or Apple did, but, for example, to join an incubator. So we have, for example, technology incubators that are being run by MNCs. And I'll say a few examples. For example, we have an incubator that is developing pharma medicines that started about 5 years ago, a combination of Johnson & Johnson, Takeda, and Orbimed, that is a VC that is funding those pharma companies. So, for example, the first enrichment of Takeda to Israel was around this incubator. We also have innovation labs. Innovation labs, the one that you mentioned at the beginning of the talk, for example, NL and Shikun Vebinui is an innovation lab that basically enable companies like NL, the Italian energy giant, in order to see what are the developments and the POC that can be combined and relevant to NL, and we are funding those companies that are joining the lab. So basically, the idea is we are encouraging those companies to come to Israel in order to have open innovation, basically, We are doing a little bit of the support for the infrastructure, but not a major one. So a little bit of the capital and CapEx and OpEx, but it's not a major one. But we are supporting those companies that are going and doing POC, or proof of concept, or some kind of a pilot in the lab that those companies are opening. So this is another way for us to encourage MNCs to come to Israel. Of course, those MNCs that are coming, they are benefiting from the tax benefits of Israel, but this is not something through us.
This is the overall government scheme, yes.
Yes, and I believe that the major idea here is to have those open innovation or incubators, and the other one is pilots. For example, we are doing pilots such that I'll give you an example. It's not a MNC, but it's a Mayo Clinic, for example, in the States. Companies in Israel they are putting the requirements. Mayo Clinic is opening requirements. We are doing this as a call for proposal for Israeli startups to implement their technology based on those requirements. We select the process together, of course, with Mayo Clinic. And at the end of the day, we are funding this Israeli company that is doing the deployment in Mayo Clinic in the States. So that's another example where the MNC can be used as a pilot beta site for Israeli companies to deploy their technology.
And again, if we look at Israel, there is again a systematic support for bringing multinational corporates to Israel to invest into Israeli companies. Most of the time also to acquire Israeli company. Again, a lot of exits are coming out, and most of the exits, again, not having a large internal market, are coming from outside. Again, one of the perennial discussion we are having in Europe mostly is about if the potential negative role that foreign corporation might have on a startup ecosystem, innovation ecosystem. Because again, one of the typical, there is train of thought that says that substantially we have multinational corporates that are coming to steal innovation, to acquire innovation, and so certain the potential or having, let's say, category leader out of a country at a certain point got tapped because again, someone come and steal it. Again, obviously, it's not my way of doing, but since it's a very, very open and discussion, I'd like to get your perspective into that.
Yeah. This is a big discussion, of course, in Israel, and I'll give you an example that makes sense. That IP in the pharma business that was created in Israel is producing around the world $30 billion a year of sales. However, the sales that is recognized in Israel is only 2 billion. So the huge difference is because of what you said before. It was companies that were opened basically out of Israel, but using Israeli IP that was developed in the academy or the early stage in the industry. So we see this phenomena, and we are not happy with that. But on the other hand, it maintains fueling the system, because at the end of the day, people are coming in order to acquire a company because of the value that those companies are going to bring them. Now, the debate in Israel goes between those that are supporting us as a startup nation, and they said we are the startup hub, and of course, those startups that are being acquired is a good way to encourage the economy and to encourage further startups, etc. For those that are saying we need to be the scale-up countries to build companies that are built to last, etc. So I believe that the debate will go years, and at the end of the day, if you're familiar with entrepreneurs, they will do whatever is good for them. So at the end of the day, as a country, we don't have a say. They will do whatever is good for them. We will try to incentivize to still maintain in Israel and still grow up in Israel. So by incentive, not by regulations. And at the end of the day, they will do what will be fit for them. But I'll tell you the thing that I see that is very different from what used to be in the past. About 25% of the entrepreneurs are repeating entrepreneurs. That means that those entrepreneurs had already an exit. They are from money perspective, they don't have any problem, and they still open a new company, and the major idea of this new company is to maintain the business in Israel. So we see a lot of companies that are started with repeating entrepreneur, and they would like to maintain the business in Israel. So it's a little bit different than it used to be, but at the end of the day, everyone will do whatever is needed. And the government, in my case, or the government in any other country, should incentivize companies to stay, but they cannot have any regulation in order to avoid those companies to be acquired.
Yeah, I call it a sort of a necessary sacrifice for the evolution of the startup species, because again, acquisition help, because unfortunately is a sort of innovation wheel, and that innovation wheel is venture capital backed. Money in should get out. Again, if there is not something big enough internally, you need to put some external money there to rotate and go faster and faster. On the other hand, as you say, it is an evolution, and probably down the way, and what we are seeing, it was a part of our discussion with Nathalie Refoua, has been also the ticket size of the investment into Israel are getting larger and larger, and meaning there is a clear trend when you see that the company now are getting larger, and we expect it probably not immediately, but in the next few years, some of the company might get a full IPO without having an exit before that, and probably there will come some Israeli tech giants, a category leader that at some point will help also to drive the system. And as you said, they're all having serial entrepreneurs, successful serial entrepreneurs. That also is part of the game. If they haven't had a prior exit, probably don't have the means, the ability, and the ambition to try to build something larger and with a bigger perspective. And this, I think, is on a perennial discussion, but I like to have your perspective to this, because it's one of my typical debate that we are having even with the European Commission, because, particularly when public money is involved, there is also the question of we are using our money in a wise way, helping others to come and exploit what you have done, or we should do something different. Again, it's a difficult topic, because it's one of the typical big questions.
It's a difficult topic, and of course, and the world is really global. At the end of the day, when we are doing, for example, now you have the virtual visit into Israel, but when you are dealing with a global world, the question is even more, it's a big question, because I can work here, but work for a European company, but still reside in Israel. So the question is, what is the business? I'm getting probably the money from the Israeli, branch of the European company, and the business is being recognized at the headquarters, etc. But I believe that the way that we try to incentivize companies to stay in Israel is to start growing the business in Israel. So we have a lot of mechanisms that are beyond our normal support in R&D to build companies in Israel. For example, the pilot program that I just mentioned is a way to have the first deployment. We are working with all the Israeli government ministries. It's amazing. They are providing beta sites for startups, for example, in hospitals in Israel. And those startups are deploying the technology. So the Minister of Health, for example, is responsible for the beta sites and the regulation. And they are deploying the technology in this beta site. It's a win-win situation. For the startup, it's normally the first deployment. For the Ministry of Health, it's the first exposure to very novel technology. And it's working fantastic in the last 2 years or 3 years. We started in 2018. And now we have 13 ministries that are working with us, and a long list of other ministries that want to work with us, and we are still finding the ways. A lot of government companies, I don't know how to call them, but it's not a government ministry, but it's a government related company. Like, for example, the electrical company in Israel is somehow related to the government. So they are working with us on innovation, on pilots, on those type of things that basically will have another incentive for the companies to reside in Israel. We are working with the institutional investments in Israel in order to have to pour the money into the high tech, such that the big money that you mentioned before will come from the local resources instead of external resources. So we are working in very different ways, but at the end of the day, as I said before, it's the decision of the entrepreneur.
Yeah, at the end is this again. Nobody put you a gun at the end to say you have to sell your company. Again, if it's a good price and the time is proper, you're satisfied. You have to go. But I think, and the other good point that you made is that the concept of nationality as well as the concept of global today is really difficult to draw the boundaries around companies. Again, we regularly map the concept of dual companies. Company that are headquartered in the US, but they keep all the R&D or large part of the R&D in their country of origin. Again, Europe, we have many of them. Israel, we have even more than that. And again, it's still probably is not, you're not capturing the entire value of the company, you're capturing a substantial part of that.
Sure.
On the other hand, another recent phenomenon that we are seeing is that there are some acquisition of multinational, of Israeli companies that turn into R&D centers that stay in Israel. Again, Philips, Nestlé, Johnson & Johnson. Again, there are some examples. Again, yes, it's true that they are acquiring company, but then the high-value activities do remain in Israel, and that's contributing.
Maybe I'll say a word about it. So if you are looking for those companies like GE and Philips and some other companies, Medtronic, for example, and those companies that Applied Materials, KLA, etc., the unique thing about those companies is not that they maintain the R&D facility in Israel. They are maintaining the IP in Israel. And developing, and some of those companies have manufacturing sites. GE, for example, has a huge manufacturing site in Israel, and the same Philips. And what they're doing, so not only the R&D is being maintained in Israel, but also the manufacturing part. Now, when it makes sense, when the product itself is expensive and the labor cost is not substantial amount of the labor, of the product cost. So, and of course, the shipment should be reasonable. So for those companies that answer this formula, it makes sense to keep the IP in Israel because the tax in Israel is very attractive, and the export is very good to have it in Israel. And of course, every other country is doing the same. If you see Italy, for example, they are promoting the local manufacturing. And the coronavirus, if you mentioned before, showed us that there is a need of local manufacturing.
Yeah.
And there's a need of local agriculture, and you are dependent on the supply chain. So those dependencies is starting that are working against the globalization. So it's a kind of localization that is needed in an event of such epidemic. But it's a combination now of the trend of doing the manufacturing where it is very cost effective. On the other hand, you need to have the manufacturing in the country in order to have a situation like crisis that can come from other origins, and you need to have something that is the basis of agriculture, the basis of manufacturing, etc.
Yeah, also again, I think the COVID-19 put in question all our theories about the exasperated globalization of the value chain, because again, when you are everything, the world is no longer global, again, temporarily, hopefully, you see that again, our paradigm of destructuring the value chain in multiple countries probably is not something that we can afford anymore. So going back to the big elephant in the room that is COVID-19, again, what has been, again, based on your data observatory, the impact of COVID-19 on Israel technologies first?
So first of all, I believe that before it started to be a real issue in Israel, we already started to call for proposals for the market of having some kind of solutions for the COVID-19 in different domains. It was not only direct, for example, like a vaccine, but it was indirect, for example, how to puritize surfaces, how to make the work in hospitals, how to handle remotely patients, etc. So it was very successful. We got 1,000 applications on early March of 2020. And we, of course, funded part of those applications, and it was quite innovative application. So that was one of the venues. But at that time, we worked together because it's a very small country. We worked together very tightly with the Ministry of Health, with the hospitals, with the all the professionals in order to evaluate the companies, the projects, and to put the demand and the requirements out for the public. What we see, there is a major change that we see at the workplace, because even now, we talked about the MNCs. Even now, most of the MNCs didn't return to the normal work. So most of the MNCs are still working 30% on site, and 70% are working, but not on site. So it's a major change in the way that we thought about work previously. And for some companies, they found out that the productivity is very high. So as a result, it might change the way that people are working. If you need only 30% at on-site, why do you have this, fancy facility? Why do you have the people that are close to work? And, why do people have to do commute, etc.? So I believe that this one will change the way that we are working. Even in the government sector, we allow, for example, our employees to stay two days at home. So in the government sector is a very unique type of a solution, because it's more strict than the private sector. But on the other hand, I believe that this is a major change. There will be a major change in the way that medicines will be provided to humans. And the main reason is that sometimes you need to do it remotely. And so the way to monitor, the way to explore, the way to deliver is something that will change the way that medicines are being now developed and shipped. We see a lot of changes in the supply channel. A lot of changes that basically moved from the physical supply channel to the digital supply channel, and the way to maintain, worldwide type of supply channel, a very sophisticated one, also has been changed. So I believe that there will be changes, that some of them will be permanent. And I hope that the major change that will not happen is having the human interactions.
Yeah, as you see, we were supposed to meet in Tel Aviv. We were meeting digitally. Despite I'm loving the conversation. And actually, personally, I found out that people are becoming, in a certain way, more accessible than they were before. Because again, in this, and so again, for a person like you that is also promoting an innovative cluster, bringing corporates, bringing people down there. Probably also the approach should be changed, because probably the innovation cluster might be assessed also virtually, digitally, and so probably also the way you set up a multinational corporate presence in the country might probably could change and probably will change. And so that's something that we don't know exactly what will happen, but definitely will not be exactly the same as it was before. And so that is probably another good food for thought in terms of how we should, us readapt our way of doing in order to have taking advantage and learning from what we have seen in the past few months. It's not something that we have chosen. but again, has been, and so probably there'll be something that we can definitely learn and leverage and exploit, while other things probably going back to normal, because I still believe that human interaction have a value, and face-to-face interaction have a lot of value. So Aharon, really thank you for your time and for
thank you very much.
And let's continue our conversation, hopefully next time face-to-face.
Hope so. Thank you very much.
Bye.